It is now well known, and everybody's actually talking about is the experience of the Rhode Island maritime trade being involved in the slave trade.
Rhode Island at the time was just outlawing the slave trade, and so there were a lot of people coming out of the slave trade and looking into getting other businesses. Sam Brown was one of the owners. He came from Rhode Island and spent a lot of money actually trying to get the repeal of slavery in Rhode Island repealed.
So the answers to who Samuel Brown is probably lie here at the State Archives.
I try to use my imagination, but it ain't no good. There's a lot of frustration in the neighborhood. Mine's still out open in the witching hour. There's such a mess, I got a town.
You have to go to the docket book first to find where the records are in the record book. Index to docket book to record book.
I got a hanging lid, heart beating in my chest. A chain link blanket.
That's not him. Samuel Brown, late St. Boston physician.
Around the corner from Lovely Street. The dark promise scores told me in my sleep.
Well, Newport at that time, it was the fifth largest port in the English colonies at the time, a thriving maritime place.
What we're able to find here at the Newport Historical Society, we've never been really sure where Samuel Brown was born. We'd always assumed that he came from Rhode Island because a strong connection with William Vernon, a great slave trader out of Newport, and also the fact his name was Brown. And he seemed to have some workings here with the slave trade himself. So we came here, and within just a few minutes we were able to find a record that he was living in Boston when he died, but he was a native of Newport, which means that he was also brought back here after he died, and he's buried somewhere in Newport. We're going to go see if we can find his grave.
Newport was, of course, distinctive by having so many different religions. He was an Episcopalian, or Anglican they would have called him in those days, Church of England. That was the third largest group.
This proved really helpful coming to the Redwood Library. When Samuel Brown died in 1825 in Boston, he left a bequest to Trinity Church here in Newport and also to the Redwood Library. We came to the Redwood Library and were able to find out through great help and through some maps inside, and we found exactly the location. So we're going to go to that cemetery where we were driving around before endlessly and find his grave.
Because so many people were mariners, the town was predominantly, in gender terms, was more women than men. Because many of the people had either were serving at sea, the men were serving at sea, or they had been lost at sea. The large percentage of households were headed by women at this time, and it got even larger after the Revolution.
We got a Samuel Brown here, but he died in 1880. And we know our guy died in 1825. We've got Captain Samuel Brown, died April 28, 1807, age 38. Well, that's not our guy either. He died in 1825, and he was born in 1754, 1753. This is Sarah Brown, widow of Samuel Brown and daughter of William King, died April 1852, and she was age 71. And that's not right either, that's probably his wife. So we don't have any Samuel Brown here. We know he was buried with his family, but we don't know where his family's buried.
I got a hanging little heart beating in my chest. A chain link blanket and a pillow.
So we finally found the will of Samuel Brown. He died in 1825 in Boston, and he has no children. He gave most of his estate to his sister and to his niece. And bequeaths to all different people thousands of dollars here, thousands of dollars there, discharging any debts that people had to him. And he names William Vernon as his executor of his estate. So we finally discovered his family, and by finding all his family, we're able to discover where he's buried. And by finding out where he's buried, we're able to find out where he came from.
This was the height of its activity and its wealth in this period, certainly by 1763-65, going all the way up into to the beginning of the Revolution. Okay. So he would have experienced that great growth there.
So Samuel Brown ended his days in Boston, but he returned home to Newport in 1825, having died in spring of that year. He's buried here in the family plot, but his story ends here, but we're going to talk about the beginning, his formative life before and during the Revolution.
Everything suddenly changed. It was really the end of Newport's prosperity in the 18th century. Didn't begin to recover until the 1830s and 40s. So it goes into a long period of decline. You would have seen a devastated town with half the population, 5,000 people, 5,000 some people, down from 9,000 something a few years before. A town in very poor condition. They took the official records of the town. When they evacuated Newport and went to New York, it was done very suddenly. But they took all the official records and they were just transporting them to New York, which was to be the headquarters of British activities, and remained that actually through the end of the war. And then the vessel accidentally sank, but it included our land evidence records, and so it's one of the problems, and the deeds and all of that, which makes it very difficult to do research. They were raised later, and in the 19th century, what was surviving was put in between pieces of silk and that kind of conservation method that was used in that period. So some of these are still there, but they're very hard to read, and they're not all there.
Finding any information about Brown has been difficult because his vital records, his birth records, would have been lost in Newport when the British evacuated. He didn't have any children. So he also has no records, no one who would have traced his story. So in many ways, Samuel Brown is a man with no past and no future. He exists only in our story.
Like Crowell Hatch, Samuel Brown made money privateering during the Revolution, and together in the slave trade. This could explain their choice for the second-in-command of the Columbia expedition. He was a man the two had previously employed in South Carolina, Captain Robert Gray of Tiverton, Rhode Island.
A chain link blanket and a pillow made of lead. Just around the corner from Lonely Street. The dark promise ghost told me in my sleep. So far away from your hidden charm.